What is up, my bodyweight warriors, and welcome back to Starting Calisthenics. Today we're going to be talking about the handstand push-up, which is the third and final bent arm pushing pattern in this series. The handstand push-up is a vertical pushing pattern, which means it's going to fit into that vertical pushing slot and share a similar space to the dip in terms of muscles worked and strength transferred. It is a great builder of the shoulders and tricep, but will also include quite a bit of upper back and chest activation during the movement. The handstand push-up is quite an advanced move and requires both a high level of strength but also balance and coordination and body control to be able to perform properly. This is personally a weak movement pattern for myself, and it's taken me a number of years to work towards and get to the point where I can achieve reps comfortably in this position. However, there is still a lot you can do at a beginner level to start working towards this. Before we jump into the progressions, let's talk about some form do's and don'ts when it comes to the handstand push-up. The first and main one that you commonly see is the banana handstand push-up. This is when people create an arch in their body, and what this does is it allows them to reduce the load in the shoulders and use some of those bigger prime movers like the chest to achieve more power in this handstand push-up. Essentially, you end up doing something more like an incline bench press when you're in that bottom position. Whilst this isn't necessarily wrong, I wouldn't say it's the perfect form for the handstand push-up. Ideally, we want to be maintaining a straight body line position, hinging at the shoulders to counterbalance that straight body line. This is going to place much more load on the shoulders and make the movement significantly harder. The second common mistake I see is partial range of motion. Now, this again isn't necessarily wrong, and there is a place for partial reps. However, if you want to build strength effectively for this movement pattern, it's important that we learn to use it for a full range of motion. The most common partial range of motion mistake I see is failing to lock out into a full handstand position at the top of each rep. The final common mistake that you see is the flaring of the elbows, which is often used to bring in larger muscle groups or also reduce the range of motion required to perform the handstand push-up. When performing the handstand push-up, ideally you want to pin those elbows in and have them pointing back so you can effectively load the shoulders in this movement pattern. All of these form cues also applies to the easier progressions that we're going to be covering in this tutorial. For all of these progressions, you want to perform roughly 8 to 12 repetitions of a given progression before you choose to move on to the next level. The first progression I want to talk about is more about building the foundations of a good handstand push-up. So primarily this would be about building general pushing strength through the other pushing patterns that I've mentioned in this series, whether that be the push-up or the dip, and then also some of the beginner variations in this tutorial. Second is the idea of balance and the importance of having a good handstand to be able to perform the handstand push-up. It sounds ridiculous, but if you have really strong shoulders, you're not going to be able to perform a handstand push-up unless you have that balance aspect locked down. Even from the beginning of your training, I'd recommend starting to include handstand work and balance work throughout your conditioning, because one, it's going to take time to build that balance and that awareness in the handstand to hold it properly, but also training the handstand is great conditioning for the shoulders itself, so it will definitely help with your strength as well for the handstand push-up. I have a full handstand tutorial which I will link down below, and if you download the ebook, there is a free handstand routine in there which uses this tutorial, so there's a great place to get started for you there. The next progression I want to talk about is basically the bread and butter when it comes to training the handstand push-up, and that is the pike push-up and all of the variations that go along with it. So I'm going to show you now each way you can make this exercise harder as you progress and build strength in this pattern. The main relationship that's going to make this exercise harder is how high our feet are in relation to our hands. The more higher they are over our hands, the more load we're going to place on the shoulders and the harder this exercise is going to become. The easiest progression we can start with is a hands elevated pike push-up. This is going to be the least loaded position we can perform a pike push-up in. However, there's one important thing to note is we still want to maintain a vertical pushing pattern. So this means we want to actually end up pushing at almost a slight diagonal so our hands travel in that vertical pushing line. Otherwise, we end up performing more like a decline push-up. Form cues to note here is thinking about full range of motion with the handstand push-up, allowing the shoulders to travel forward so you can touch your nose to the ground at the bottom of a pike push-up, and then also pushing back out into full elevation and stacking the shoulders over the top of the hands at the top of that pike push-up. From here, we can move on to a flat surface on which our hands and our feet are on the same level, and we can perform a pike push-up. After we feel pretty comfortable with the floor pike push-up, we can basically start to elevate the legs progressively and therefore add more load progressively to our shoulders, eventually building up to the point in which our feet are on the same elevation or roughly the same level as our hips. And this is kind of the highest that I would take a pike push-up. Two things that I wanted to add that I personally like doing and I use a lot of clients for the pike push-up is Firstly, what I like to call a deep pike push-up, and that's extending the range of motion. You do this by elevating the hands on a surface on a step, and it basically allows you to go a little bit deeper than you would if you just had the floor in your way. The next kind of unique pike push-up progression is what I like to call the no feet pike push-up. And this is essentially when you go down into the bottom of a pike push-up position, is you try to lift the feet into what would be the start of a bent arm press to handstand. This is a great way of building strength in the bottom of a handstand push-up, and also to make the exercise significantly harder than a normal pike push-up. Right, so as I said, the pike push-up is really going to be your bread and butter when it comes to this exercise. You can work through those progressions, progressively loading your shoulders more, raising up those feet until you get to that top progression. Now what do? You kind of need to start working on the handstand push-up itself. This is definitely the hardest part of the handstand push-up because there is a significant gap between the pike push-up and the full handstand push-up. Next we move to the wall-assisted handstand push-up. This is going to take the balance element out of the handstand push-up and allow us just to focus on the strength element using the wall to assist. I personally recommend only using a chest to wall position when training the handstand push-up against the wall, as this is what is going to transfer over most because it will load the shoulders in the same way as if we were doing a freestanding handstand push-up. The back to wall handstand push-up isn't the worst option to have, providing we try to perform it in the straightest line possible against the wall versus having what you commonly see as a very big arc and performing it against the wall. As the jump between pike push-up and handstand push-up is quite large, the first progression that I like to get people doing with a chest-to-wall handstand push-up is using partial range of motion. Yes, I said there was a time and place where it was useful. By using a partial range of motion, it allows us to get more reps and more volume in the handstand push-up, which should build strength faster. As you get stronger, you can increase the range of motion that you're going to be covering in the handstand push-up until you get to the full chest to wall handstand push-up. And following on the same lines as the pike push-up, the final variation for the chest to wall handstand push-up is going to be using a larger range of motion. So elevating those hands and performing a deep chest to wall handstand push-up. By now you should have the strength to perform a handstand push-up, but we also need to start considering the next progression, which is balancing the handstand push-up. One exercise I like for this a lot is just performing handstand push-up negatives. Starting from a full handstand position, you want to try and lower yourself as slow as you can down into that bottom handstand press-up position. This is going to help grease that groove in terms of the plane of motion that you want to achieve when performing the handstand push-up, and because we're also stronger in a negative, we can slow down this movement and really overload the movement pattern. So this is going to be great for both building strength and building the balance to do the handstand push-up. You want to perform negatives as slow as you can, but ideally you want to be getting a minimum of about 4 seconds on that negative. Next would be performing a bent arm handstand hold. So this would be performing a hold in the bottom portion of a handstand push-up position. This progression is good for finding the level of lean that you need to get to find that counterbalancing point to perform the handstand push-up correctly. If you're too vertical, you're going to fall forward, and if you're too horizontal, it's going to require a stupid amount of strength closer to the 90-degree push-up to hold, and you're just going to fall down onto your feet. So this progression is all about finding where that bottom position is for you. The next step on from this would be tying it all together, and that is using a headstand push-up. So this is when we perform a freestanding handstand push-up. Instead of having a constant time under tension during the whole movement, we allow ourselves to rest on our head at the bottom of this position before then pressing back up into a handstand. So this will reduce some of the balancing element and also make it slightly easier to perform. Plus we can also set ourselves from that headstand position to press properly into a handstand. Even if you don't manage to catch the handstand afterwards, this is still a good drill to practice that freestanding handstand push-up. The next thing to do would just be to string it all together, and finally you have the full handstand push-up. This is an incredibly tough move, so don't feel disheartened if it seems like a long way off. If you use these progressions, if you stick to it and work all those aspects of the handstand push-up, you will achieve it. It's kind of just a matter of time. The final thing I wanted to mention is about additional equipment. I know this is a calisthenics series and it's about bodyweight training, but I couldn't not mention what I think to be a very important progression, and that is the military press. The standing military press, or something like a seated military press, like a Z press, is an incredibly useful tool for the handstand push-up. As I mentioned, there is a large leap between the pike push-up and the handstand push-up, and often ways it's very hard to scale and still get enough volume in to get a good response. This is where I think the military press is a really good option, because we can incrementally add weight on in a way that we can count, and this way we can build some strength in that kind of awkward in-between stage between that pike push-up and that full handstand push-up. You can also, if you're an absolute beast, add a weighted vest to this movement, but I'm definitely not strong enough to demonstrate that one. But that's kind of the handstand push-up in a nutshell. This is a tough movement, but as I've demonstrated in this video, there's still a lot you can do at a low level about learning to balance your handstand and about building up some strength in those pike push-up progressions that will eventually get you to that full handstand push-up. As always, guys, you can grab the free Bodyweight Warrior ebook with all of those programs in and the handstand routine in the description down below. While you're down there, you can also leave a comment, join the conversation, let me know what you thought of this tutorial, and if you have any questions. You can also hit that thumbs up button and support the channel, show that you're enjoying this Starting Calisthenics series. Right next to it is that subscribe button, so you can join the Bodyweight Warrior tribe and don't miss out on any more. But that has been it for this week, guys. Have a strong week, and peace.